fact that even if you are able to pull it off, it's going to take several minutes before the attacker passes out, during which they're going to be fighting you to try to get free.
Okay, so this lady's never choked someone unconscious.
The art of fighting without fighting? Show me some of it.
Hi there everybody, Michael Valenti here with the School of Self-Defense in Indianapolis, and in today's video I thought it would be fun to take a look at some self-defense tips on TikTok. For those of you who are new to this channel, be sure to hit the thumbs up button, the subscribe button, and the bell button so you can get notified whenever we make new videos. I am a professional self-defense instructor. I have been in the self-defense field for 25 years and I've been teaching since 2008. I run my own school here in Indianapolis, and all the information to join that is in the description box down below. The self-defense field is one of the biggest hotbeds for misinformation, and TikTok seems to be another large hotbed for misinformation, so I wondered how bad it could actually get when you combine the two. So all I did for this video is I went to TikTok and searched self-defense, and I looked at the first video that showed up. This is what showed up for me, and so I'm going to take a look at it and kind of give my thoughts on what the person is saying, the techniques they're teaching, and what maybe they could do better. So let's go ahead and take a look at this.
4 in our countdown of top 10 TikToks is Dave teaching me this rape defense triangle choke. I really wish those 6.7 million views would have gone to this video instead, which is a much simpler option.
Okay, so right now she is comparing two different techniques. Triangle choke, which is a common choke found all throughout the grappling arts, and then what's called a head scissor and an eye gouge, and she's saying that that's a better technique. So let's first talk about the triangle choke, and then we'll talk about the head scissor, and then kind of address what she's actually saying about them. So a triangle choke is what we call a blood choke. That's where you are blocking the carotid arteries of the neck so that the brain can't be supplied with blood. There's a very similar choke that's extremely popular called a rear naked choke, sometimes referred to as a sleeper hold, and it's kind of doing the same thing but with your bicep and your forearm, and you squeeze the person's neck. In the world of self-defense, the rear naked choke is kind of considered a checkmate, that once you get someone in it, the game's basically over. The beauty of the triangle choke is it's effectively the same choke, but done with a much stronger muscle group, your legs. Not to mention that the triangle choke is especially good for women's self-defense because it takes place in a position that is incredibly common in sexual assaults. Okay, so the other technique that she's recommending here is a leg scissor with a double eye gouge. Some people in the self-defense world are aggressively against eye gouging, and that probably stems from how often eye gouging is taught in really stupid places. Ultimately, striking the eyes is one of, if not the single most effective strikes that someone can actually do. Having said that, the argument against an eye strike is that eye strikes, if they do not drop your opponent, are going to escalate the fight even further, making your opponent be even more aggressive. And I think the reason why a lot of people have an issue with eye strikes is because they are so often used as a replacement for skill. Ultimately, if you couldn't land a jab in boxing, you do not have the martial skill to land an eye jab in a self-defense situation. Striking the eyes isn't a get out of jail free card. If you don't actually know how to fight for real, those techniques aren't going to help you. Instead, think about eye strikes as an exclamation point or the cherry on top of an already well-rounded, well-developed fighting skill. So in this situation, the lady is doing a scissor choke. It can work, but it lacks the same kind of control over your opponent that a triangle choke has. And a double eye gouge from this position just wouldn't really be effective. Her opponent can move upwards as much as he wants, and she doesn't really have something that's going to hold him down enough to apply the right amount of pressure. Not to mention a really basic grappling skill, which is the double underhook pass, is basically free from this position. And don't think that someone who is wrestling girls to the ground take advantage of them is completely ignorant of any kind of grappling techniques. And also, as she reaches up for those eyes, it's not very hard for him just to grab her arms and pull them away from his eyes before she touches them. When you throw something at someone's face, they tend to react. So the best case is this guy's an idiot and gets his eyes gouged out, and that would be lovely. But a more likely scenario is he's going to swipe those arms away, pull back, you're still on your back, and you still have this massive man ahead of you, and you've lost control over your opponent because you don't have them in your guard. Let's talk about guard for a second. If we go back to the very start of this video, her opponent is stuck in what is called an open guard. You can see this with my cursor. And an open guard is not exactly a good self-defense maneuver, but it's a couple inches away from a phenomenal one, which is a closed guard. Ideally, you want to have your legs locked behind your opponent's back, preferably fairly high, like around the scapula if you have that kind of flexibility, and you keep their head low to minimize the amount of force that they can generate with a punch. Remember, when you're on the bottom of the fight, you don't want your opponent to sit up. Even though it feels like you want them to get away from you, you don't want them to sit up, because what happens when they sit up is that they get the space they need to throw down a punch. Ideally, you want to try to keep them as tight as possible, which is precisely what the triangle choke does. You can see how the back of her leg puts a lot of pressure on the back of the head to pull them down, and then it's further locked up with the other leg, kind of creating a literal locking mechanism with your legs that allows you to apply a lot of downwards force. Because she has one arm in and one arm out, she's actually controlling his shoulders as well. Think about the way that a seatbelt holds onto you during a car crash. That's kind of what her legs are doing, is it's holding him in the same way a seatbelt would. So it's going to be very difficult for him just to pull out of this. Whereas in this scissor choke, she doesn't have that kind of control over her opponent. This move could work, but it's not going to work as well as the triangle chokes. She's saying this is a better move, and I disagree with her wholeheartedly. But let's go ahead and listen to her explanation of why.
Instead, which is a much simpler option. A triangle choke takes significant training and practice to pull off successfully,
Okay, so she already made one of the arguments that drives me nuts in the world of self-defense. My channel is all about helping people rethink self-defense by kind of slaying the mythological dragons in this field. And one of the myths that really need to die is just because a technique is simple, it means it is better. And that's not necessarily always the case. Ultimately, there is no technique that you can just pick up day one and be perfect at. Every self-defense technique is going to require training. So if you are going to be putting in the time, putting in the training, what do you want to spend your time getting good at? A technique that's a 10 out of 10 technique, or a technique that's a 6 out of 10 because it's easier to learn but ultimately is less effective? One of my biggest philosophies is I don't care what works, I care what works best. And if what works best takes me a couple more weeks to learn, then I'm going to take those couple more weeks because I want the most effective defense that I can muster.
Even we missed a critical step where you reach and grab the attacker's leg to angle your upper body. And of course you have to factor in the stress and adrenaline of being assaulted.
Okay, so they said that they missed a critical step of hooking that leg. That is a optional part of that choke. It does help a lot when the person's bigger than you to create a better angle of attack. However, the choke works just fine without it, so I wouldn't have called it critical, but it's a good step to have. But then she says,
the stress and adrenaline of being assaulted.
and this is another one of those myths in the martial arts world that drives me nuts, or in the self-defense world that drives me nuts, is this idea that when you are attacked, you're going to be so flooded with adrenaline and fear that you won't be able to do anything. And that is completely true if you are not trained. If you are not well trained, you will panic in stressful situations. However, if you are well trained, you won't. For example, if you have ever avoided a car accident by swerving your car, you may have experienced some panic a couple seconds later, but the action you made was instantaneous. Why is that? Did you go off and drive having people intentionally try to hit you with their car all day long? Or is it that you have driven so much and you're so familiar with the action that you're able to execute these very high level techniques with a very low level of effort? Another thing to think about is a sniper whose job is to stay calm so that they can get their shot. They train in a way that they can stay relaxed and stay calm in incredibly stressful situations. Believe it or not, the skill of self-defense is not to learn how to operate under stress, but rather to delay or completely nullify the stress response. So any self-defense course that's telling you that, you're going to have to learn how to operate under this extraordinary amount of stress doesn't actually understand the psychology of developing a fighter. Does that mean you're going to be perfectly calm every single time? No, but the idea is to train in a way to develop your mind so that it doesn't overload itself when in a stressful situation so that you can think clearly. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually spar and engage with other martial artists. Learning how to deal with violence and stress in a healthy way is kind of like that old story of a guy who would become immune to a snake's poison by taking a little tiny bit of it at a time. One of the dumbest ways I see people train self-defense is they take these people who are completely ill-prepared for violence and just throwing them in the deep end and leaving them emotionally traumatized. And then the guy's like, see, that's how hard it's going to be on the streets. But the way you actually prepare is by slowly introducing more and more and more violence so that when you do get them in the deep end, they already are really good swimmers and they know how to keep their head above water. Of course, that takes time, and a lot of people aren't willing to put in time, but that's a laziness issue, not a self-defense issue. Let's see what else she has to say.
And the fact that even if you are able to pull it off, it's going to take several minutes before the attacker passes out, during which they're going to be fighting you to try to get free.
Okay, so this lady's never choked someone unconscious. Whereas I've never choked someone unconscious with my triangle choke. I have done it with my rear naked choke. And it takes seconds to choke someone unconscious. And even though I've only dropped 2 people this way, I have seen people dropped with basically every choke in the book. Guillotines, rear naked chokes, arm triangles, and the choke in question here, the triangle choke. If there was a choke that took minutes to pass somebody out, yeah, I would agree that it was bad self-defense. But it doesn't take minutes, it takes seconds. If the person is cool, calm, and relaxed, it may take 10, 15, maybe even 20 seconds. But that's assuming that their heart rate is like cruising at a 60. Because the higher their heart rate is, the quicker their brain is drained of blood, just because of kind of the nature of this choke. I've seen people go out almost instantaneously when put into a blood choke, and generally speaking, in an actual fight, it takes between like 3 to 6 seconds. It's easy enough. You can just look up videos of combat sports where people don't tap to chokes and they go to sleep. It's really quick. So this lady has no idea how chokes work, which is disturbing that she's showing anyone self-defense, because if you don't understand chokes, which are kind of the checkmate of grappling, which makes them kind of a checkmate in self-defense, it's troubling to think that she would be teaching self-defense or giving self-defense advice.
A simpler option is to go for an eye strike. The effect is pretty much immediate, and because it doesn't take...
So, it's funny, earlier in this video I was talking about how the guy could just grab her arms and pull them off before she could really get an effective eye gouge, and literally in his pantomiming of how painful it would be to be eye gouged, he just pulls them right off. I can't stress enough, I am extremely for striking the eye. I think it is a important part of the self-defense arsenal. To the extent that some of my students joke, if they forget to eye jab someone in a self-defense situation, they're going to have to run back and be like, listen, dude, I'm sorry. I'm going to get in trouble if I don't do this real quick. Boink. But eye jabbing is just like any other strike or any other tool. If you do it in the wrong place, you'll get screwed. Every bit as much as I don't like the eye gouge from guard, I don't like punching from guard. I don't like anything that involves you extending your arms out and giving your opponent space so that they can hit you or apply pressure to the back of your legs and break your guard. You are not in a winning position here, so you shouldn't be trying to win. You should be trying to get into a winning position.
And because it doesn't take a lot of strength training or practice, almost anyone can do it.
Okay. I want to go back to that sentence. So she says, because it doesn't take a lot of strength training or practice, anyone can do it. There is no such thing as a martial arts technique or a self-defense technique that doesn't require training or practice. The first time I ever went to shoot a gun, and it's a little embarrassing, I was at like 20 feet from my target and I missed it. Even something as user-friendly as a pistol requires training to use. Mace requires training, a taser requires training, eye jabs require training, punches, kicks, knees, and elbows require training, and not some, a lot. The idea of a technique working without strength is a little bit of a misnomer, but the idea is that it should work for someone who is smaller than their opponent, so it should not be strength reliant. But there are very few techniques that are also completely effortless. But the strength is not the issue of this statement. It doesn't take a lot of training or practice. I guarantee you will not pull off any self-defense technique without a lot of training or practice, unless you are extremely lucky. Wow, I was intending to watch a few of these TikTok videos, but I somehow managed to get quite a lot of footage out of this 1 minute long video. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. People tend to comment on self-defense videos without having watched the whole thing. So to prove to me you made it to the end before you started typing your comment, go ahead and include the word practice in your comment. Also, if you've made it to the end of this video, you're clearly enjoying yourself, so hit that thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you get notified whenever we release new videos. And if you live in the Indianapolis area and you'd like to come train with me, all the information you need to get started is on our website, theschoolofselfdefense.com. And if you live too far away from me to train, don't worry, we also offer Zoom classes for distance learners. That's also on our website, theschoolofselfdefense.com. So until next time, everybody, I'm Michael Valenti with the School of Self-Defense. Fight on.